two Royal Enfield bikes we're looking at today, the 350 Classic and the 350 Hunter, both share a history that goes back to the first 350 Bullet that was born in 1932 at the Redditch factory in Worcestershire. The motorcycle had a sloper engine, it was inclined forward, it had exposed valve gear and a rigid rear end, and they were very popular in the day, and the British Army used them for their dispatch riders. The motorcycle was refreshed over the years and various modifications were made, including going to the vertical engine that we see today. In 1949, the Indian Army were using the Royal Enfield 350 Bullets for border patrol, and they opened a factory in Madras. In 1955, Redditch was sending bullets to India in kit form, where they were assembled and then on-sold to the market. However, India eventually decided to completely make their bikes at the Madras factory, and from the get-go they were making 20,000 motorcycles annually, and that's a lot of bikes considering they didn't have the modern techniques of manufacturing and mass producing that we do have today. So India is doing very well, making and selling their bikes for the domestic market. No problems in India. However, in Redditch they were trying to make progress, and they were retooling and redesigning, but India kept making the old models, including for the Indian Army. At this point, Redditch and India diverged. Redditch released an updated models of various bikes, including the 350 Trials. However, in 1967, Redditch closed, and in 1970, they were completely gone. However, in India, Royal Enfield kept making the bullets as they always had done. However, it must be said that the quality just wasn't there if they were to really compete on the world market. During the 1990s and the 2000s, Royal Enfield underwent some significant changes. Quality improved, and they started to produce some very, very nice bikes. So here we are today. We have the two bikes, the Classic 350 and the Hunter 350, and considering there's 13 years of development, shall we say, between the two bikes, with the Classic coming in at 2009 and the Hunter in 2022, just how much development has there been over this time, and which one should you buy? It should be said here that the new J-Series motor that's in each of these bikes, it's a gem of a motor. It's really free revving and it wants to go, and I like it. The gearbox on each bike was really slick and super smooth. The gearbox on the Classic, however, was just one of the nicest gearboxes I've ever had, and it reminded me of the gearbox I had on my first Continental GT 650. So sweet. Swapping between the two bikes, you realise that each of them has its own individual characteristic, and considering that they both share the same engine, they are similar but so very different in the way they feel, the way they handle, and also in the way they make you feel as a rider. The power figures for the engine is that it produces 20.2 kilowatts at 6,100 RPM, and the torque comes in at 27 Newton meters at a quite friendly 4,000 RPM, and it's good because that's where you ride a lot. Maximum power at 6.1. Look, when you're getting up near there, you know you're revving, and however, considering that neither bike has a tacho, you just need to keep the revs where both you and the bike feel comfortable. And that's where the torque comes in, because you're riding in that torque band most of the time, and that's what you really need on a bike like this, rather than just outright power. Where the difference between the two bikes reveals itself power-wise, that is that the Hunter weighs in at 181 kilos, which is 14 kilograms lighter than the Classic 350, which is a considerable 195 kilograms. And pulling that extra 14 kilograms around, you can feel it when you're accelerating up a hill. Look, it's not a great thing you'd notice. However, it can make a difference, especially if you're carrying a bit of luggage or if you've got a pillion on the back. That's something that you might like to consider if you're thinking about choosing between the two bikes. The Classic has a 19-inch front rim on the front and an 18-inch on the rear, and that tends to make the bike feel a little bit more lazy into the corners. It's not really lazy, it's not heavy, but it seems really predictable, and I like that in a bike with a 19-inch front wheel. It tracks a corner really well, and it's not so susceptible to road variations as the Hunter. Now, the Hunter, on the other hand, has a 17-inch front wheel, which makes it feel more like a modern bike with a sharper and lighter steering. It's a lighter bike, and it has lighter steering, and it makes the bike feel more sporty, I guess, if you could call it sporty. When it comes to the seating position, the Classic has a more traditional single seat with a pillion seat that you can take off at the back, and with that removed, it looks really good. It gives it an even more classic old world feel. But when you're sitting on the Classic, you feel like you're sitting on top of the bike in more of a sit up and beg position. Now, the Hunter seat is comfortable. It's a double seat, but I wonder how it's going to go and how it would feel after a couple of thousand kilometres. My experience with both the Himalayan and the Scram seats, I found that the frame rails under the seat tend to become a little bit obvious after a while, and I feel that maybe the Classic seat would hold up better than the Hunter seat. However, that remains to be seen. And of course, the Classic could finish up the same over time. The fuel capacity for both bikes is the same at 13 litres, but the Classic tank is wider, which means that your knees are spread just that little bit wider, and the foot pegs are wider and larger as well. When it comes to aesthetics, it's always going to be a personal choice as to which bike you like the best. The Classic certain has an old world character about it, and oftentimes the word character means that it's just a tad odd in some respects. I like the look of the Hunter, especially from the left-hand side, where the motor looks so good wearing the Hunter clothing. Now, the Hunter has a persona and a personality all of its own, and it's not pretending to be anything else. It's a great design, and for a company such as Royal Enfield, they've done really well with this bike. I must say that the exhaust on the Hunter sounds really good. It's a stock exhaust, and it bangs away when it's idling, and you can hear it when you're riding it. It's a more modern looking exhaust setup. The Classic, on the other hand, it looks bulky and it's heavy and it's quiet. If I was to buy the Classic, I'd want the same sound but just a little bit louder. I always wear molded earplugs and it's hard to hear the exhaust, but the sound of this 350 motor is the sound of India, and I love it. I want the same sound, just a little bit louder. I think that's going to be difficult, so any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Regarding the gauges, the Classics always had the nacelle-mounted speedo and instruments, but it's pretty much the same, but it's just been modernised just a touch, and some of the information is digital, but there's no tripper. However, there is space for one, and maybe it could be a later edition for next year's model. The Hunter has a more modern instrument set up, and it's set to the side just a a little bit, and the first time I saw it, it reminded me of the way that the Ducati Scrambler brought out their instruments, and it was quite different for the time. However, I do understand that there is a mounting point for the trip and navigation system which would go in that spot, so it would look basically the same as the Meteor. When it comes to choosing between the two, there's not a lot in it. I'm a big fan of the old school look, and I like the way that the classic 350 looks. I've had 3 classic 500 bikes, and I really like them and have sold them for various reasons. But all things considered, personally, I like the 350, and I would choose that over the Hunter. It's just for the old school feel and the ownership. Look, I definitely changed the muffler. I like the more solid handling of the bike. I think it's a more handsome bike, and it has a centre stand, which when I do my own mechanics, that does make a difference to me. The Hunter, however, is a more modern, it's a lighter bike. It sounds better, it handles better, you could say, and accelerates quicker, and it's more of a rider's bike. The motors are the same, but you wouldn't really notice the extra weight of the Classic unless you rode the 2 bikes back to back. And if you do get a chance to ride the bikes back to back, you'll find that each bike makes you feel a particular way, and that's one of the most important things to consider when you're buying a bike, especially between these two. Which one makes me feel the best? These bikes are a new generation for Royal Enfield, the Classic 350 Reborn and the Hunter 350. The motor and the gearbox on these bikes is just so good. Our friends at Royal Enfield are to really be commended on the way they've created 2 modern bikes, one with a modern twist that makes it stand out from other bikes in the same category, especially with the sound of the motor and the exhaust. And the other bike is the old Classic 350 that everybody loves, especially in India, but they've made it even better, and it still sounds great. As I got to the end of making this video, I realised that I've shown a bit of a bias toward the Classic. But I've got to say that I really do think the Hunter is the bike that's going to sell, certainly in Australia. It's going to be great for city riding. It's got that sharper handling and its lightness. You'll be able to move it around the garage, and I think it's more an engaging ride for going a bit faster. Whichever way you went with either of these bikes, you'll be getting a really good bike at a relatively affordable price, and also a bike with a direct lineage back to 1932 when the first Royal Enfield Bullet was created. These bikes look original, and certainly the Classic gets a lot of attention when you're on the side of the road or when you're at a service station. People will look at it, and they'll more often than not comment on how good it looks and how much old school it is. And I guess in summary, as we've said, the Hunter probably appeals more to a modern rider and a learner rider, the Classic perhaps to someone who is more traditional in their thinking, whether they be old or young, and it's such a cool bike for hipsters to ride as well, and it's just such a cool statement. So whichever way you decide to go, once again, you can't really go wrong. Thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, you might like to give a thumbs up, and you might even like to subscribe. That'd be great. So until next time, go well.